Good afternoon. Welcome to the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs here at Brown University. I'm Stephen Kinzer. I'm a senior fellow here at the Watson Center, and I am the professor who's had the privilege of teaching these 7 very committed students a little bit about international journalism. These students have worked intensely over the last few months learning the skills of reporting and writing that go with covering the world. We start with a principle that I have always followed as a journalist. I love this line from Ida B. Wells, a great campaigner against lynching, who traveled the South by herself documenting cases of lynching and ultimately did the work that led to the anti-lynching law of 1907. She said, "People must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press." It's with that principle that these students went out and tried to enlighten or learn the skills which will help them enlighten the rest of us about a very important issue. The issue that we selected for this semester, as you all know, was immigration, and particularly the situation of the 800,000 younger immigrants who are covered by the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which is now under threat. So each of my students went out into the larger Providence community, something that some students here at Brown never do. And each of these students had to find an unfamiliar situation, burst beyond the comfort levels that normally students are allowed to live within when they're here on College Hill. They did tremendous reporting, locating these people and finding their stories. In many cases, they become quite close with the people they're writing about. They learned the skills of how to write profiles and how to write stories that convey meaning and convey place. But I think they learned something much more than that, which is the background of this story that is affecting so many very distraught younger immigrants in the United States today. So I'm immensely proud of the journalistic work that these students have done, but they've made clear to me that the greatest impact of this semester was their chance to get to know people who are in the situations that they're writing about. This also plays into a great principle I've always had about journalism. My work has led me to conclude that the most fun thing you can do in life is to meet people whose lives have been very different from yours. So these students had a chance to do some of that. I think it's been mutually beneficial. They are eager now to tell you a little bit about what we did, but most important, to serve as a platform to allow some of these young immigrants to tell their own stories. Reporters' job is to be the conduit by which people can tell their stories. And in addition, we now have the chance to allow some of the people we've been writing about to tell their own stories. So I'm much anticipating this. I'm really looking forward to a rare opportunity to hear directly from people affected by policy. It's always been my belief that journalists should cover policies from the perspective of the people being affected by them, not from the perspective of the people who decree them. And that is what our students have done during this semester. So to begin our presentation, we want to give a little bit of background about DACA. What is it? Where does it come from? And why has this situation emerged that we're here to discuss? And I've asked one of our great students, Ivy Scott, to come up here and lead that discussion.
Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel. So before we get started with our discussion, we as a class, and could the students in the class please stand up?
Hey. These are my magnificent 7.
So we all wanted to give a quick explanation of what exactly DACA is, or what it was intended to be. So DACA is an acronym. It's short for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The program was created under the Obama administration in 2012 via an executive action. He essentially ordered the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services to give certain protections to undocumented immigrants that came to the United States when they were children. The program had a lot of very specific criteria that unfortunately left out many people. But there were roughly 800,000 immigrants who were covered. These were called DACA recipients. And they were protected from deportation for 2 years. This program also included things like the ability to get a driver's license and a work permit. The protection was renewable every 2 years up until this past September, when Trump decided to end that program. As of this March, no new people can apply for DACA. However, previous DACA recipients are allowed to apply once more. Because our president has also decided that making a replacement for DACA is Congress's job, and Congress has done, surprise, nothing. Nobody knows whether or not recipients will be allowed to apply again in 2 years' time. So there are, as a result, a lot of mixed feelings about DACA across the board. There are some people that are scared. There are some people that are hopeful. They hope that because DACA did not provide a path to citizenship, new legislature can. I'm sure that you all have your own respective opinions about the policy, but we're here today to hear from the people who can best describe how these policies, or lack thereof, are affecting the people that they were written for. So, without further ado, please give another warm welcome to Yaruska, Pedro, Nelson, Otto, and John, our panelists for today.
So we're going to start with a brief little description. Each person's going to tell their story, whatever they want to share, about how they get to be in this situation. Whoever wants to start.
Good afternoon. My name is Nelson. So my story begins. I came to the United States back in 1991. I was 1 year old when I came here. My mother brought me across the Rio Grande on her back to lovely Providence, Rhode Island, and I've been living here ever since. I lived in Providence until I was 13, and then from there I moved to a suburb named Cranston. And then from there, I graduated from Cranston High School, and now I currently live in Johnston. So between the time that I was 18 to about 22 years old, which was between 2008 and 2012, I didn't really have any idea where I was going to go with life because, the previous administration, which was the Bush one, was very, how do you say this? They didn't really have any support for immigration reform. They were completely against it. But then when Obama came into play, we were just kind of waiting to see what would happen, if he would pass anything such as the DREAM Act or immigration reform in general. And then, 2012, he granted DACA. So then from there, I was lucky enough to go back to school and then, begin my career process from there.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is John Lopez. I am 21 years old, and I am a junior here at Brown University. I am happy to be here today, but my life hasn't always been quite so happy. I was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and in the midst of political and economic turmoil that was prevalent at the time, my parents made the serious decision to sell all of their possessions and to move to the United States. I was 5 at the time. To put it lightly, my life here in the United States has not been very pleasant ever since. My parents came to the United States following relatives who had already been established here and who were already U.S. citizens. And it was to my parents' understanding that with our tourist visas and with U.S. citizen family members to sponsor us, that reaching residency status would not be too big of an issue to overcome. I don't think at the time that they were ready to be criminalized for as many years as we've lived here and to really find a uphill and near impossible battle to reach residency. And so I grew up in Arizona right around the time that 9/11 happened, and Arizona has always had very strong negative rhetoric towards immigrants, and in particular Mexican immigrants, and a lot of the nativist rhetoric about the need for a wall and the need to protect from criminals coming over, so to speak. And yeah, my life was hard. I think I grew a lot of resentment for my dad in particular, because he was never around the house very often, and when he was usually upset, and he had a lot of negative things to say. But at the time of my youth, I didn't realize that it was because he spent all day working, doing manual labor, painting houses, so that he could make maybe $25 a day, on a good day $50 a day, to try to support our family of 4 at the time. Reality set in for me eventually, and my parents talked to me about our status and the fact that we had to be very secretive about it, and that if anybody at school asked me where I was from, I was to say that I was born in the United States, that I was born in Arizona. And as I got older, I recognized that there was a lot of difficulties and a lot of dangers with this status. And in particular, when I was in middle school and when I was in high school, and when people were talking about plans for adult life and plans after high school, I never thought that I was gonna do very much after high school. I figured that there wasn't any opportunities for me to do. I realized that tuition in Arizona was not accessible for people that were not citizens or that were not residents, and I knew that there wasn't any financial aid. And so that was kind of what I lived life with. I didn't, even though my parents very much had instilled in me a love for education, I didn't particularly apply myself because I knew that there was these barriers in my way that I didn't have any means to combat. But thankfully, with a lot of activism work, President Obama passed the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals in 2012, and it's what allowed me to go to community college after I graduated from high school, and to really start thinking about what is it that I can do if I study, and what is it if I do if I choose to take the opportunities in front of me. And so I'm here today now. I transferred from Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona, and I study education studies here now at Brown. And I think that this is an issue that isn't going to go away very easily, and I think it's something that the communities that are most affected by it have been traditionally silenced. And so I think that it's really needed for people that are not directly affected, but that are cognizant of this issue, to really start advocating for this issue and to get more involved and to get more aware. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Yaruska Enola. I'm a DACA recipient as well. I actually arrived to the United States when I was 8 years of age from Peru, so we are neighbors, Ecuador and Peru. And I come from a mixed status family, so meaning that some of my relatives are residents or citizens, but my mother and I are not. And I originally arrived to Boston, Massachusetts, but moved to Providence, Rhode Island, because my mom had relatives here. And I went to elementary, middle school, and high school and university in Providence and, well, Rhode Island in general. I graduated high school in 2011. And it was a year before DACA was introduced. So knowing about my status, I didn't quite know how I would proceed with continuing my education, because it was something that was very instilled in me since I was very young. And so I took a gap year, or as I, told my friends, I needed to take a gap year after high school to get my thoughts together. But in reality, it was because my status didn't allow for me to go continue a higher education, because I had to pay international tuition, having been raised in Providence practically. And finally, through the Board of Education, institution was passed in in Rhode Island for undocumented immigrants, and shortly after DACA was implemented. So I got accepted to the University of Rhode Island, and I graduated 2016 from the University of Rhode Island. And yes, so I share a lot of the sentiment with being frustrated, not really having the opportunity to pursue higher education or pursue a career because my status did not allow it. And it was something that, you know, we weren't asking for a full ride to an Ivy League institution. We were asking for the same opportunity to any university that we decided to get our education from. And yes, with that being said, I am a graduate, and you know, we are going to discuss about the narrative of what it means to have DACA and how it is unfair to kind of put everyone under the same expectations that they need to be the greatest and the best to deserve something like DACA, which is very untrue. So, yeah.
Hey, my name is Otoniel Andres. I'm originally from Mexico. I arrived here in 2001, October 21st. And for what I can hear, I think I'm the oldest one because I graduated in 06. And that makes me feel old. Well, so I had a little bit more experience as of graduating in 06 until 2012 when DACA came along. After graduation, that's where you start feeling all the pressure, like everybody said, making plans, going to college. I couldn't make any plans. I couldn't get a driver's license. I couldn't apply in any jobs that I wanted because I didn't have a social security number. So what I decided to do is I started working with my father. We rented a small garage, and then he works in the automotive field. So we used to fix cars for people that we knew, and that's how we make our living. We also got a TIN, which is a tax ID number, which gave us the opportunity to file taxes and gave us some kind of number similar to a social security number that would identify you somehow. So it was just like something kind of a little relief per se, you know. Even though you're undocumented, you still can file taxes. And at the end of the year, we would fill out a 1099 and file taxes every year, me and my family. You know, a year after I graduated, I had my child, my firstborn. It's my daughter. She's 10 now. And I struggled a lot because, like I said, since I didn't have a driver's license, I couldn't drive and see her. I couldn't get a decent job where I could afford to move in with her. So at this point, she lived with her parents, I lived with my parents, and I used to just drive to work and drive to see her and my daughter with a car that a friend kindly registered to his name and insured. So I didn't have, you know, I was always in fear when I was driving, fear that I was gonna get stopped, which I did, you know, a couple of times. And the last time that I did, I got home confinement, 3 months, which is a bracelet they put on your ankle. And I remember, and this is when, you know, I think the worst part that, you know, I had in my life, the most impact that I've suffered, it's that while I was there in Cranston getting the bracelet on, there was another person next to me. And then he asked me, "Oh, you getting the home confinement too?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What for?" And I said, "Well, driving for us with a suspended license or no license." And I said, "What about you?" He said, "Oh, I was driving under the influence." And I said, "Oh, so how long are you getting it for?" He said, 10 days. I was getting it for 3 months just because I was trying to go to work, go see my kid, go see my wife. Things like that gets you mad because you see this guy who was just being reckless, driving under the influence, getting 10 days on home confinement when you're just trying to, you know, live your life as best as you can, but you get 3 months that was something that really hit me hard, you know. After DACA came, it was a relief, completely relief, because my wife is also a DACA recipient. And this was a life-changing thing for us because I was able to get my license. One of the most important things that a lot of people take for granted because you've been having it. You are born here, you have a social security number, you can just go and apply and get it. Now, for us, it's something, it's a privilege to have a driver's license, to be able to drive freely. And after DACA, I was able to apply in body shops, move up, get some certifications, thanks to the owners in the body shop. They saw the potential in me, and I went to New England Tech, have 8 certifications that you know, helped me move up in my field. And after 4 years, I moved in with my wife. We got married, and now I have a 2-year-old son also. But you know, DACA was life-changing because I was able to get a decent job, get my license, and actually live like a regular American per se.
Hello. First, I just want to thank all you guys for taking time out of your schedules to come meet with us. My name is Pedro Story. I came here when I was 4 years old. I grew up and lived in Providence for most of my life. I went to school here, middle school, elementary school, high school in Providence. I went to underprivileged middle school and elementary school. You know, the schools in Providence aren't the best, you know. In high school, I was fortunate enough to apply to Classical High School, which is like a magnet school, a local magnet school. And I realized that I really, really liked learning. I excelled really well in math and science. When I was in 11th grade or 12th grade, I started seeing all my fellow classmates apply to like good colleges and take their SATs. And during that time, I just realized that I wasn't one of them. I graduated high school in 2006, so you're not the oldest. We're about the same age. And after high school, I started working odd and end jobs. I got into a company. It was like a don't ask, don't tell policy, so I was just kind of like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. It was a good company. They helped me out a lot. But during that time, like I felt like I was really like wasting time because I could have been in like academics or like, you know, doing something else. So when DACA passed in 2012, and around the same time that the in-state tuition was granted, I applied to CCRI the first day. I remember that. I applied, and like CCRI, which is the Community College of Rhode Island, didn't even have the implementation, like the system set up yet. So the person at the front desk was looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" But I mean, I took it. I applied. I got in. I did really well. 3 years later, I applied to Rhode Island College, and I got in. Graduating in 2 weeks in finance. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to tell my story to everybody. And the main reason I'm here is so that you guys could take you know, our stories and try to do something with it. You know, it's a very unfortunate situation that we were in, but I think that it's up to us to like change policy and, you know, to move forward.
Thank you so much for being here and for accepting to talk about your stories. So for the sake of clarity, would you mind just explaining what the difference is between being documented, which is a term we often associate to DACA recipients, and being undocumented?
I'll take this one. So being documented means that you're able to work, you're able to drive around. which seems pretty normal to most people, but to a person that doesn't have documentation, it's a really like no big thing. It also means that you can pursue college more easily because you're not worried about public transportation or lack of. You're not worried about walking places or anything like that, you know. You could start planning for the future. You could start building credit. You could, you know, invest in 401ks and all these other things. You could start planning for your children, for your family, their colleges, you know, things like that. It doesn't provide in-state tuition, so even with DACA, certain states you're not able to apply as in-state tuition or get the fees at that level. I think a lot of like my colleague over here explained that they would have to apply as international students, and the fees are ridiculous at that point. So most people just opt out of that. That's what DACA is to me.
I mean, just to add on top of that, like I shared my story, is just, like you said, just the common stuff that everybody has, every American has, like you said, just the credit, just the license, going to school, just continue with life. It was just a struggle for us, so having this is just all the common things that they were not coming to us. It's just, you know, really a relief, you know, being able, like you said, to build your credit, have your license. In my case, being able to drive, see my daughter with no fear of getting stopped, getting deported, it was just a big relief, you know, being able to, in the field that I was working, you know, continue and study and build in that field already, because in my case, I thought I had already lost so many years since 06 and 2012, and, you know, I wasn't able to go to school, so I like what I did, so I decided just to build on top of what I already was learning, and that was, you know, life-changing, because now I'm pursuing my dreams, and at the end of the day, I don't want to stay, you know, working for somebody. I want to make my own business, and that's what at the end of the day I want to do, and I hope the DACA stays or something else comes in along that helps me pursue that dream.
Just to add on top of that, I felt like DACA was a matter of when, not why, it was taken away. So when DACA was introduced by the Obama administration, it provided you a work permit, which you got in the mail after your application went through and you were accepted. And then with that, you were able to get a social, and that social, correct me if I'm wrong, says not valid for re-entry to the US. And with that, you were able to get a license or an ID, a state ID. And of course, every state has a different, some states don't allow for DACA recipients to get, that's another issue. And so with DACA, it was really a matter, it was temporary, it was an executive action, and it could be taken away any moment. And it was a matter of when and not why. So that's why it's so urgent as well.
If I could add a little to that, I would also like to speak about what it means to be undocumented and not just what it means to be documented. Because very many of the people who are documented have family members who are undocumented. And the fact of the matter is that there's approximately at least 12 million people in the United States that are undocumented today. And this number is likely not going to go away unless, I guess, if we fall into the sort of plans that the current administration has for these people. I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot so far is the access to driver's licenses and the ability to be able to drive and to go to work. I think that speaks so much about what it means to not have these things. And if you've been living in the United States for, say, almost 20 years, like my parents have, trying to work and trying to create revenue for the United States, that if for some reason or another they're speeding a little bit over the limit, or a tail light is out and they are stopped by a police officer, that the lives that they have established for themselves could be destroyed, that they can be thrown into detention centers, and increasingly now have very little access to to legal means to kind of contest that. And so one of the things about being undocumented that I think we're going to continue to talk about is just how criminalized these people are, that they're being made criminals by definition. One of the things that was shared to me by a close friend, she mentioned that like when someone runs a red light, you call that a criminal act or an illegal act, so to speak, but you don't then call the person that ran the red light an illegal. And I think that one of the things that is so pervasive in our country is that we call the people who have made very serious life decisions to come to this country, we reduce them to the title of illegal, and then we think about it really opens the floodgates to rhetoric that all the only goal is to do away with these people.
I just want to add one thing. I would say like the only difference between being undocumented and documented for me was kind of like since you got your driver's license, not only could you drive, but for me it was like you could finally travel and see like the rest of the United States. Like I went to Chicago for the first time ever. I flew on a plane for the first time ever last year, and I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but to me that was like something that was crazy for me because I've never been to Chicago. I've never seen anything else besides Rhode Island and DC.
Thanks. Could you also define the difference between a resident and a citizen? Because these are terms that we use, but we don't necessarily know what they mean exactly.
I'll take this one. So basically, a resident is that you have a rightful legally be able to be here for, I think, 5 years. After the 5 years, you're able to apply for citizenship. You, as a resident, you have most rights as a citizen except voting and a few very like specific things. The difference between DACA and somebody who's a resident is that, going back to the first question, is that there is no clear path to become a resident from being DACA. And the legislation, they never set that up because that would actually be amnesty, and everybody in Congress is against amnesty, It doesn't sit right with a lot of politicians. So once you become a resident, it's really, you take a test, you take a history test with like 20 questions, and it's pretty easy to become a citizen.
Well, and just talking about the path towards residency or citizenship, there is no clear path at all for any of us. This is just temporarily, and then, it's not any sort of way that they tell you, okay, this is that, and then you can get in line to get a residency or get in line towards citizenship. There is no line, no path, no clear path towards that, which is what we all want. Because we were raised here, we just were born in another country, but this is all we know. And then all these laws that they have, at some point I think there are no laws in immigration because it all depends. If you came with a vacation visa and it just expired, if you came illegally completely, it's just, there's so many difference. Like you said, family members that have residency or family members that have citizenship, but either way, it doesn't help in a way. So there are no actual laws and paths towards being a resident or a citizen.
Thank you. So many DACA recipients are students or are of the age to go to school and to university. Could you talk a little more about in-state tuition and also relate that to federal aid and DACA?
I can take that. So in my case, I went to University of Rhode Island. So I applied like a little bit before DACA was implemented, just like a few months before DACA was implemented, I was accepted to the University of Rhode Island. And in my case, in Rhode Island, the Board of Education, which by the way isn't like a bill, isn't a law, it's just the Board of Education passed something that would grant undocumented students to pay in-state tuition. It wasn't like you're going to school for free. It was just, you are the same par as residents in Rhode Island, and you were able to pay the same tuition as if somebody who had been born in Rhode Island. And so in my case, I was able to get in-state tuition, and go to URI. That was my first step. Then step 2 was figure out how to pay for tuition in, at University of Rhode Island. So I actually commuted, and if any of you guys are familiar with the University of Rhode Island, it's about 45 to an hour away from here. It's in Kingston, south of Providence. And I was able to get a small scholarship from University of Rhode Island because they're public schools, so they don't have any private funds to distribute to individuals. And so I got a partial scholarship from University of Rhode Island, and then I had to fund my way the rest of, so like I had to pay about, you know, the rest, which was like 80% of my tuition. So I had to look for private scholarships, meaning that not all scholarships are open to undocumented students. Let me clarify that, because a lot of scholarships are only open to citizens. And, you know, a lot of people that are applying to college don't kind of have to worry about whether you're a citizen or not to apply to a scholarship. You just kind of apply. As an undocumented individual, you kind of have to be really look into the details of what the scholarship qualifications are and whether or not they would accept you or not. And then I had to, so that didn't cover all of my tuition. Then I had to, you know, pay out of pocket the rest of my tuition, as a lot of us do. And so this is why it's so hard. It's not only trying to get into school and trying to be at the same level as other students or residents or US-born citizens, is also trying to find your way and trying to find funds on how to pay for school, but not only tuition, but you have to pay for books, you have to pay for other necessities that you have, everyday necessities, food. Perhaps as we as individuals got DACA, you know, you were able to drive to school, but then you have to pay for gas, insurance, and all of these things that, you know, a lot of people don't think about because we don't have access to federal loans.
Something really quickly. Yaruska was talking about the lack of access to in-state tuition and the lack of access to any sort of financial aid. In particular, any sort of financial aid from states or from the national government are more or less straight off the board, and they're not, people in our situations are not able to receive these. And I know that a lot of the sort of rhetoric and ideas behind this is that these groups of people are not contributing to society, and so therefore why should the state allot some of its money towards helping these people go to school? But the thing is that undocumented people in this country, regardless of their status, we all buy things, we all work, we all pay rent or mortgages, and so the states and the federal country, they're receiving a lot of taxed money from us. But then when some of us are trying to get further ahead and to be more productive members of society, they're saying that the tax monies that we've given shouldn't be distributed back to us. And it's really sad and really kind of insidious, because you're suggesting that these people shouldn't be allowed to be better people for the very sake of the United States itself. To give an example, I have a sister that's a year older than me, and she also has DACA, and she's always been this really exceptional student, and she graduated, I think, like number 6 in her class in high school or something. And in Arizona, the local university, the University of Arizona, was really promoting a lot of like very big scholarships to attend the University of Arizona for the people that graduated in the top 20 of their class. And so my sister applied to the University of Arizona, got accepted, and the whole summer that they were telling her about how good it was going to be and getting her ready for the pre-orientation programs. And then when the fall came around, she went, and actually doing the legal paperwork, they told her that she wasn't eligible for the scholarship, and not only that she was going to have to pay out-of-state tuition, like has been mentioned before. and it was heartbreaking for her. You know, I know that she cried a lot that day and a lot of days following after that, because she thought that she had done everything right to be able to access opportunities, and then to have them taken away from her at the very last minute for no fault of her own.
Thank you. So in the media and in society in general, there are many immigrant myths. Are there any that you would like to address or that you've heard a lot and would like to comment on?
So one of them is that, you know, Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions always says that, you know, Mexicans or immigrants from Central America and South America come here only to abuse the system, which is a lie completely. You know, as you've heard before, we talk about paying taxes, and that we don't get those back or trickle down back onto us. But at the end of the day, like, you know, we do file taxes either through the TIN number, or if, you know, we're documented now, we can file our own taxes. And also that we come here to abuse the healthcare system, which is, again, false. And basically anything negative that you hear Donald Trump say and Jeff Sessions, because they just want to paint a picture that, you know, we're the worst human beings ever. You know, like, I know, like, the big population in Rhode Island are all Guatemalan, and I know them to be the hardest working people that you could ever find. You know, you could give a guy $8 an hour, and he'll paint your house, he'll mow your lawn, he'll wash your car, he'll do everything faster and quicker than everybody else that I know. And if you compare it to anybody else, like, I'm just gonna say American. I'm not gonna like state what race, but you know, just an American in general, they'll probably just, you know, work for 2 hours and they'll leave because they'll say, oh, this work is too hard for me. You know, I've washed dishes. I've done everything that you could think of. I've worked in fish factories. I've opened up oyster shells all over the place. And now, you know, I'm in school to become an accountant. So, you know, like I said, that's just a myth that you hear from Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and his whole administrations.
I think to go off of that, there's a lot of rhetoric that's saying that people that are undocumented are criminals, and it really opens up a lot of it really opens it up for people such as the current president to say that these people are rapists and drug dealers and murderers and gang members and what have you. I think one thing that is not brought to national attention is the fact that these people are being made criminals, and not the fact that that people that come to this country without papers or that fall out of status once here, that they didn't come with the intention of being criminals. But instead, like has been mentioned, these people are denied access to basic human rights and protections, such as health care, such as being able to drive, such as being able to legally have a job. And so when you don't allow someone to legally work, regardless of how willing and how able they are to contribute to society, you really push them to the margins and to the shadows. And so in the case of my parents, they sell air conditioners. They kind of file contracts for another company, and in that sense, they're not actually employed by anybody. But that's kind of an opportunity that they really found and how to make for themselves. But the vast majority of people, you see a lot of people working in things like flea markets and swap meets, just trying to find any sort of way to get by. And so to me, it's really kind of disgenuine when people call undocumented people criminals, because the fact of the matter is that national policy is pushing these people to be criminals. So.
And just to add to that as well, just to clarify, so unauthorized presence in a country is a civil offense, not a crime. And also overstaying a validly issued work permit or travel visa is not a criminal offense. So, like, if you were to be deported and came back, that would be a crime. But being unauthorized in a country is not a crime. So by labeling a whole population, 11, 12 million individuals as criminals is not, you know, correct, per se. And, you know, if we get into the itty-bitty details of it, deporting 11, 12 million people in this country, and it costs about $12,000 to deport every individual. You can do the math, you know. So in a economic sense, it doesn't make sense. And of course, in a humanistic way, it doesn't make sense either. These are people's lives, people's families. They're human beings. And, you know, a lot of us come from mixed status families. I have a brother who's a U.S. citizen. He's 13 right now. I'm 24 years old. So if you deport me, like, you're separating a family, you know? And, like, this is an opportunity to put a face to an issue that's very real to a lot of us.
Just to add to that, one of the myths that has been said was immigrants are taking away American jobs. The reason why a lot of us came here and why our parents came here, a lot of it was because of turmoil within our own countries, but a lot of it was just America has a need for immigrants to come in here. America was built on immigrants. Throughout history, that has always been the case. So now we're just us immigrants. We're filling that void, or at least our parents are, or were. You know, these jobs that immigrants are taking aren't your top-paying jobs. You're not working in an office, air conditioning. You know, you're working in brutal temperatures, long hours, laborers conditions. So these jobs, I wouldn't say it'd be taken from Americans, but it's just the American economy provided so that we could be here and take these jobs, you know. You know, somebody mentioned to me, you know, what do you say to somebody who says, well, how about somebody who's in the same, looking for a job like you are after you graduate? You know, what do you say to somebody like that? And I say, well, if I'm your competition, then you're doing something wrong or something, because you should be able, you had a lot more resources than I did, and I shouldn't be that competitive with you, but it is what it is.
Just to add a little bit of that, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about us and about everything we get, as you have been hearing. And a lot of people think just because we got DACA now, we are just like everybody else. And obviously, like she said, in school, you still have to go through struggles. You know, in my case, in my job, everything, I still have to, you know, go through struggles. I have to try to build on top of that to try to support my family, to make a better life. And when you were undocumented, you always had fear in you. And with DACA, that fear doesn't go away, you know, because it's temporary. You only got 2 years. You can build on top of it, but what happens if they don't renew it next year, then the next 2 years? Then everything you built is just vanishes. Everything you try to pursue, it just comes back. It's like you take 3 steps and then they're just gonna bring you down all the way down, you know. In this case, everything I built, everything I've studied, and then the places I've moved in my field, if DACA was to just be banished at all, then I don't know if my body shop, the owner of the body shop would want an undocumented person in their body shop. So why would it be of me? Go back to the jobs that nobody wants to take, which is washing dishes, washing cars, all these other jobs that nobody wants to take, nobody wants to do. So in our cases, we always have that fear in the back of our head, and we always have that mentality of what's gonna happen. You know, we try to build stuff, but kind of like blindfolded because we don't really know what's gonna happen in the future. That's why this is very important to us, and something has to get done.
Just to add to that, so by having DACA, it has relieved some pressure. I do feel more free to walk around and make plans, future plans, and work on my own projects and pursue career goals. But at the same time, like he just said, we know in the back of our heads it's temporary. It could possibly be forever, but we're not sure, and the government hasn't made any efforts to help us calm that fear down. You know, so a lot of times, like, you know, you kind of have to, like, when you're deciding on what you're gonna do next, what's your next move, you have to, like, think, you know, like, have a plan B. You know, what if, you know, in 2 years you're not able to renew your DACA? So, you know, everything you worked for will go down, you know, not go down the drain, but, you know, at least in this country, you won't be able to do a lot of the things you wanted to do. So there's always that little fear in the back of your head, you know. It's always concerning, you know. You're never, you know, you can never really sleep okay, you know.
Okay. Just to focus on Rhode Island for a minute, could you tell us what's happening right now for DACA and for immigrants locally?
I could start the conversation. We can like pitch in as we go. But so bill by Shelby Maldonado was introduced, and it was to provide or keep providing driver's license to only documented individuals, and it passed. And so only people. So obviously you can't apply for DACA anymore. But people who had been granted DACA in the past can keep renewing their driver's licenses in Rhode Island, which provides us the opportunity to, you know, take our families to their doctor's appointments, to the supermarket, to school, to pretty much anywhere that we need to be. And there have been previous bills for driver's licenses for undocumented individuals. That have been introduced to grant driver's licenses for undocumented individuals, not just documented individuals, but unfortunately they have failed to pass previously. And yep, so that's where we're at.
Could you talk a little bit about who DACA leaves out and what the problems are related to focusing only on documented individuals in the press in particular?
Well, I'll take this. Just after Donald Trump decided to end DACA, the people that had already are DACA recipients can renew one more time for 2 more years. But all the other people that were about to qualify to get to be in DACA, they just not be able to. They're not able to apply anymore. You know, all these people that I think the minimum age. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the minimum age to apply to be a DACA recipient has to be 15. So all these people that are in high school, and they were turning 15, and they were starting to make plans towards college and all that stuff, now they can't because they don't know what's going to happen. You know, if they were just hoping into applying, qualifying into DACA, and building into the future, now they can't. You know, and then same thing with us. It's just 2 more years. We don't know what's going to happen. So there is a lot of other people that are out there, and then that they don't qualify either because maybe they were getting a GD, but they were trying to just, you know, get their things straight up and try to become a better person for themselves and their family, and they just can't because DACA is not an answer. It's just a temporary relief.
Yeah, and I also like to add, so it also leaves out TPS recipients, which is temporary status, temporary protected status, which is the Department of Homeland Security designated foreign countries, so designated a subsection of foreign countries, like people from those countries to be granted temporary protected status, and this has been taken away recently. And these are people or individuals coming from countries that they are in dangerous conditions. Like there's crime, there's violence, there's gangs, and they pretty much if you were to send them back, you are sending them back to death or very precarious conditions as well. And so that's also an important issue to attend to, apart from what's happening with DACA as well.
Another group of people that DACA obviously leaves out is all the people that don't fall under the very narrow definitions and very narrow qualifications of DACA. all of us up here on this panel have been heavily vetted in order to be able to receive DACA, and we've had to go through INS? Yeah, we've had to have our fingerprints scanned. We've had to have shown a lot of documentation. We've had to pay money for the chance of being approved of receiving DACA. But again, I think that in the national consciousness, there's sort of an understanding that as long as we protect DACA and as long as we keep DACA alive, that somehow this issue of undocumented migration is going to be fixed. And the fact of the matter is that there's still going to be millions of people here in the United States that are being pushed to the margins and are being pushed to living in the shadows for the sake of telling people that the people that are undocumented are the issues of any economic turmoil, that the people that are undocumented are the reasons for crime in our communities. I think if you look at what it means to be an American citizen and what it means to be born in the United States, you see that crime is present in the United States, that poverty is present in the United States, that people that do bad things are here in the United States. But if we're to believe what some politicians want us to believe, it's that all these people that weren't born here are all of a sudden the reason why all of these things are happening. And I think that we really need to question and push back upon that. If anything, a lot of the people that come to the United States want to put in their best effort and their best work to being here because they recognize that it's a new country for them and that they don't have anything to fall back upon. And so I think if you look at the people on this panel here and our family members and people that we know, a lot of us are kind of a living representation of the American dream of working hard to try to achieve something. But I think that the national conversation around this doesn't recognize this and instead tries to label everybody here as criminals. And then recognizing that obviously that this is a very hard sell. They try to pick some of the youngest among us to say that these people are the only people that deserve protection and status. And that these people, because they're young and because they're going to school, that we should fight for them. But kind of what's lost in that is the fact that anybody that doesn't fit into the identity of being a young person going to school is only ever further criminalized and further used as a scapegoat for all the problems in the United States today.
I want to say like what the requisites are for DACA itself. So you had to be between the ages of 16 to 31. You had to have lived in the United States before June 15 of 2007. That's when you had to enter the United States, and then lived here continuously for 5 years until 2012. You also couldn't be convicted of a felony, a significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors. So that's technically the requisites. I've known people who entered the United States literally like 2 months after June of 2007, and they're probably the most straight-edge person that I could ever meet. Christians, etc. And they just couldn't apply for DACA itself.
So we're gonna. Did you want to say something? Or?
Sure. Just to add to what we were talking about earlier. So somebody once asked me, was I happy with the federal government? And I asked them, what kind of question was that? Was I happy with the current policy? Because they said, oh, you qualify for DACA and you're benefiting from the policies that they're making. And I said, well, personally, I am benefiting from some of the policies that they created, but my community, my family isn't. We're often used as like a bargaining tool or bargaining chip in the federal government. Where a lot of us here, go to school and are successful, and however you want to define that, but. We come from a big community, and we shouldn't be the only ones that benefit from DACA. We shouldn't be the only ones considered as humans, and the rest of the people dehumanized.
Okay, we're gonna open it up to questions pretty soon. I just wanted to ask if anybody had final words to say about the perfect immigrant narrative that we referred to earlier, and the dangers of falling into that narrative.
So, as Pedro and John have mentioned before, we have this continuing narrative that all DACA recipients or all the people who should be saved and allowed to stay in the United States should be educated, or should at least have gone to college, should be an exceptional citizen, should be all these prerequisites that, you know, kind of set this standard to be this perfect human superhero being that does it all, when in reality a lot of us are just human beings. You know, we want to raise a family, we want to travel in the US, we perhaps don't want to get a PhD, or, you know, we want to go to community college, we want to do a lot of things that aren't what superheroes do. And so that's a bit problematic when these narratives are created and these standards are set, and a lot of individuals don't fit into those roles. And that's when a lot of the rhetoric of the perfect immigrant begins, and that's when you start defining a line of who should be deserving of basic human rights and who should not be, and that's when there is a problem.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? We would like to, yeah?
More than a question, it will be sort of a pointer. And there are three things that I think we need to keep in mind when we talk about DACA. First, it's not as you mentioned, it's not a criminal offense, it's a violation of an executive order that is happening because there is no law that has been passed. The second one is, I think we need to approach DACA as an economic burden to the U.S. And if we're talking about the Latino purchasing power, it's at $1.7 trillion that just the Latino in general, because I think the DACA are more, the Latino are more affected by the DACA than any other race, which is similar to the GDP of Australia and Spain. So we, and I'm not a DACA, I'm just an activist, we can target this movement more on an education approach than of a begging form. And if we involve the employers, and if we involve the corporation, and if we involve the Chamber of Commerce and the Department of Labor, those are the people that have to raise their voices in regards to where DACA is going to go, because the millennials will be the labor force in 2020 and above, because 50% of the labor force in the U.S. Will be retiring pretty soon due to age in different parts of the country. So there are cities and towns that are already, the population of the cities and towns are aging. And if we pick the North Shore in Massachusetts, we have the largest senior citizens in the whole state in the north. So the best way to approach it, aside from your story, add it more on, we are needed here. And this is also part of the diplomacy and treatises that were developed in this country back in the years. None of us would be here if there were no those treatises and international laws and public affairs that were developed with countries that you came from. So when you talk about the DACA, go more into those pointers that people need to understand that the immigrants that come here, we come here because the U.S. invaded the country for work, because there are international relations that were developed, and they developed the treatises, because of public affair, and because of laws and treatises that came with history, because there were borders or relations with the trade, NADA and those. So I'm hopeful. I believe that this is going to be the first time that we have a comprehensive immigration reform. I think there are millions of people supporting you. And the movement is, although it's scary, I think it's a good avenue for people to wake up and realize that immigrants are needed, and they will always be needed.
Well, in my case, where I work, they're all Trump supporters. And from what I heard, probably at least more than 80% of the American public, it's okay with DACA. You know, all the other percentage, it's probably ignorance because they don't know about the subject. They're not well informed, and there's all this misunderstanding. And the other percentage is probably just people that are racist and they're just not gonna change their mind. You know, so you gotta try to target those that are not informed. And yes, I think more than 90% of DACA recipients are either starting, working, paying taxes, obviously buying cars, renting, buying houses, making businesses. They're just making this much more, contributing to the economy of the country. It's not that we are just giving stuff and we are staying here and taking advantage of the system. We are, like she said, we are needed in my job. Like I said, they are all Trump supporters. And once they found out I was DACA, they started asking questions, and you know, and after they started to know how things are, they started changing their mind. So it was, you know, an eye-opening. So, you know, knowing that there is people that support Trump, but after realizing how things really are and getting the knowledge, you know, they can change their mind.
If I could add something to that really quickly, I think it's obviously very clear that Trump in his presidential campaign ran on a very anti-immigrant sentiment and rhetoric, and I think we have to really ask ourselves about the people that voted for Trump. And I think one of the things that you really find is that a lot of these people are kind of scared of their own lives and of their families' lives and of their families' well-being, and for very good reasons, because very many communities in the United States are not being prioritized by the federal government, and a lot of communities in the United States are kind of seen as backwater and as something that we don't have to care for. And so I think that a lot of political rhetoric has been said to tell people that are fearful for their economic and their economic well-being and their families' safety and well-being. They're being told that the answer is to point the fingers at immigrants, and not realizing that it's a similar battle for all of us, and that, as Otoniel mentioned, that immigrants are actually adding to the economy of the country and making it better for all people. But instead, there's kind of an understanding a false understanding that somehow immigrants are making it harder for us, and that's not the truth. The truth is that many policies and many community, communities are not being taken care of in and of themselves.
Were there any other questions? Yes?
Just wondering if anybody can tell us about the Dream Act, and just why perhaps other than like the complexity of politics, it hasn't been passed already. Like so many people do talk about a comprehensive immigration reform.
And yeah, we're gonna talk about the Dream Act, so I want whoever answers could please define it and say why it hasn't passed. Talk about that. No?
Well, yes, like she was saying, there are a lot of factors why the Dream Act won't pass.
Could you define it also?
It would
explain
just
what it is?
one thing that Trump has focused on, I think it's chain migration too, which if the Dream Act would pass, would make us residents, then it would make us citizenship, and then we would be able to ask for our family members, such as parents or brothers, I guess, or in case my wife, and then becoming legal and documented. And that's one thing that he has focused on too. He's been trying to stop chain migration, which is not, chain migration is just like keeping families together. Because in my case, if DACA was to be banished and I have no other option to get documented, I think my only option would be applying for something else. And my from my experience and seeing other people, I will have to go back to my country, be there for 10 years, and then maybe I will be able to come back. And that would mean leaving my daughter, my son, my wife, going back for 10 years and come back when one is 20, the other one is 10 years old. So I think that's one of the facts that, I mean, Trump is just focusing on and doesn't want to, you know, just targets us. You know, and this is just history, because when the Italians came, they targeted the Italians. When the Polish came, they, you know, this is just history all over again. This country is made of immigrants, and I think there is nothing wrong with that, because this country is so great because of all the immigrants.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here, and I work on issues of immigration and have interviewed members of mixed status families and have been in a mixed status family myself in the past. I was wondering if this was your first time sharing your story to someone outside of your community, outside of your family, working with students in particular, and how that experience was like. Because I know as a researcher, I write about these stories, but I've also been interviewed, and the experience is completely different. So I was wondering what that was like, and if that was what type of relationship that spurred between you and the students, and did you get to read the stories that the students were writing about you, and what that was like? Because again, telling your story from first-person perspective is very different to seeing how other people read it, right?
For me, this is the first time I'm telling the story where it's getting documented and people are going to be writing about it. I've told the story in different forums before, but I've never had feedback. But yeah, but I'll be interested to see how it comes out.
Well, in my case, I don't know if a lot of you watch the news, but I was in Channel 12. And to be honest, that interview I really didn't like it, the way they posted it, the way they put it, but it's them. After that, thanks to that, I was invited to Brown University also. They have a monthly topic, and that topic was DACA. So I went there and shared my story. That was my first time actually sharing my story to other students and other people, you know. And it's pretty cool. It's a pretty good experience. Like I said, I think my main focus for my experience is just trying to, like I said, share my story and then get the knowledge to the people that, you know, getting all these misconceptions out of the way. Because like I said, on my job, I would have never thought they would have changed their mind and they would be, oh yeah, go for DACA, being a Trump supporter. You know, just how there is misconceptions from us to Trump supporters, and then from Americans, Trump supporters, to us. I think we just need to break them both ways, because sometimes as Spanish and Latinos or people from other races, immigrants in general, we think that Trump supporters are racist just because they target us, but no, they're not. You know, sometimes they voted for Trump because of different reasons, economic reasons, and they're not all racist. You know, they just need the knowledge, and I think it's just a fight going, you, me, and I think we just need to get together and actually find an answer, you know, for this.
Personally, it wasn't my first time sharing my story, and you know, I leave it to the person who's writing my story and to best describe or from their perspective. But I also like to add, we were talking previously about interacting with Trump supporters, and I agree with you. I've actually sat down and had dinner with, it was an immigration story kind of dinner, and there were a couple of Trump supporters there, and you know, at the end of the meal, they came up to me, they were like, you know, you're good, you know, I would, you know, you would be able to stay, you know, but, you know, them there. So it's like they create an image of your story, and that's a good story, but it's you versus them. And so I think that's also another thing to kind of bring the human perspective of telling our stories and showing our faces and sharing them.
So I was not interviewed by this class, but I can speak to the fear of talking about my story and the fear that communities have talking about this. As I mentioned before, I grew up in Arizona, and if any of you have been to Arizona or know where it is geographically, you recognize that it's part of the Mexican-American border. And so there's a lot of undocumented immigrants in Arizona, and there's a lot of people in mixed status families. But there isn't a lot of organizing around this work, or historically there has not been a lot. I think it's increasing now. But there's a very real fear to talking about this, because at the end of the day, you can't control how the other person is going to take it, and you can't control what the other person is going to go and say to other people. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that really believe in these ideologies about being about deporting these immigrants and generally being anti-immigrant. And so sharing about your experience could very well mean opening yourself up to be arrested and to be put in a detention center and eventually deported, even if this is the only country you've ever known. And so it's a very real fear to talk about these things, particularly in the places where people are most affected, because those are the places that are also most policed. I lived in Arizona, and every day all you see is Border Patrol cars driving up and down. And so one of the things that we were talking with Professor Kinzer is that journalism and media is a way to draw attention to this issue and to humanize these people. And at a certain strong level, I very much agree. But there's a lot of care that needs to be taken, and we also need to recognize the fact that our government is by nature working to silence these people.
This isn't my first time speaking about this. I have spoken before, but before DACA, basically, I never really ever spoke about this. Kind of like how he said that it was kind of like taboo to ever mention about your status, but I found that keeping quiet or keeping silent doesn't really help, because there could be folks out there that are willing to help you out, or like at least mentor you, encourage you in some type of way to go up against that battle. Because when I was 18, a lot of my teachers wanted me to pursue college, and I just kept quiet the whole time because I was really embarrassed to tell them that I couldn't because I was undocumented. But nowadays I just don't, not that I don't really care, but it's just like, if somebody wants to hear my story, then I'm willing to tell them. I don't know if, I have spoken at colleges, but I haven't read anything or received any feedback about that. And I don't really, I'm not really looking forward to hearing or seeing it either. I just want to say what I want to say and say how I have to say it.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit, but I was curious what your thoughts and feelings were about the future. I know that like this administration, normally the response is like some combination of like fear and anger, but I was curious if any of you felt hopeful at all, or just like what you were thinking in general.
So as of right now, there is no like real clear path. I kind of hope that a new president comes in and basically comes up with a better idea than what Trump has. But I don't. One of the things that my lawyer has told me was like, if I want to become a U.S. citizen, I would have to marry, and I don't want to marry for that reason. If I ever find love, I don't want it to be with somebody just because of that reason. And I don't want that to be my only option. So I hope that there could be a better plan set up along the way between now and 2020 or even after.
Just to add to that, from my perspective, I'm actually very hopeful. I think that the climate in this country is perfect for like grassroots efforts and people like us to come out and tell our story and educate other people who are able to vote, who are able to change policy. I think the time is perfect, when you look back at like the 60s and when the civil rights movement was going on, you want to look back and you want to ask yourself, where did I stand, during that time? And I think that right now is the perfect time to ask yourself, where do you guys stand?
Thank you.
Do you want to say any final words? Okay.
This has been such an impressive evening. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Please.
Just one final question. Thank you so much for everyone for sharing your stories, for doing all this work to educate us on this topic. Just acknowledging the fact that in many political conversations, you're often asked to sort of, prove your dignity or prove your accomplishments. I wanted to take away the focus from that for a moment and just ask if any of you have any instances or examples where you found community or solidarity, or just some positive sort of experiences that you've been able to build, kind of like ways you've been able to build home here in the U.S. Does that make sense?
This is it. Well, yeah, being in this type of forum and being able to meet other people who are in the same situation as I am has helped a lot. This is not the first time I've done something like this, and it does create kind of like a community, although we might not know each other very well, but we all know that, we had similar struggles and we went through the same things, That's it, really.
Well, I think with all of us, since we have lived most of our lives here, whatever, now with DACA, where we have gone to school or work or wherever we go, usually people don't tend to ask you if you're documented or undocumented. So they just get to know you, they ask you questions, you get along with them, you create a friendship. And I always been a person that, likes to, have fun, laugh, make friends. And recently I just had one person on my job that delivers parts, and I always get along with him pretty good. He's always nice. We always laugh, like I said. And I don't know why the question came, and he said, "Oh, were you born here?" And I said, "No." So that's when he kind of backed up a little bit and said, "Where were you born?" And I said, "I was born in Mexico." And that's when he said, "Oh, don't tell me you're a DACA recipient." I said, "Yeah, what's the problem with that?" Before you knew that, we were friends, we were talking, and, it's just all those misconceptions that people have, or, things that people think about us. But I always feel welcome in this country, and I think that's what we want to stay. I always felt part of the community in school. I always had friends. I have tons of good experiences here, and I love this country because of them, because of you guys, because of everything that there is in here. So besides everything, I have tons of good experiences besides the bad ones because of being undocumented, but I think that's why we all want a path towards citizenship, because we are comfortable here and we want to be here and we want to be part of this country.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those stories. We have a lot of events in this room, but not so many of them come right so directly from people's hearts and souls. If my years as a foreign correspondent taught me one thing, it's that I never feel sorry for myself anymore. You'll never hear me talking about my problems. I think this is one of the great things that journalism does. It exposes you to real life in a way that puts yourself in a larger perspective of what's really going on in the world. You heard this afternoon about how completely this issue shapes these people's lives, even though it's something that shouldn't take up so much of their living oxygen. So I hope we all keep this in mind. Sometimes you walk by people on the street, you have to imagine what story is behind that face. I loved hearing Yaruska say that this evening gives us a chance to put a face on an issue that's very real to us. That's what we hoped to do this evening, and I want to thank you for helping us succeed in doing that. This is also an eminently political issue, as we've talked about. We have a political election coming up in this country. candidates can't talk about every issue. They're going to talk about the issues that they feel are urgent, that people are pushing them on. It's important that this issue be driven higher up on the agenda in this coming political race, and not just among political candidates, but as somebody pointed out here, businesses, chambers of commerce also are relying on relying so heavily on the outcome of this effort. So an attempt to mobilize people as we're coming into a political season really is a chance for us to take a kind of diffuse concern and focus it on something that can be action-oriented. So for all of us, I hope the inspiration of the stories you've heard tonight will help drive us towards something. It's wonderful to hear, but think of what these people have gone through, what they faced, and how inspirational their attitudes are, and try to use that as some fuel so that we can all be motivated to do something to bring some justice to these people and 800,000 others like them. Thank you so much. This is one of the most wonderful afternoons I've had in this university. Thank you.